Yes, good morning. It's Thursday, the 24th of September 2020. Welcome back to the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. My name's Pete Fairbairn, and my job is to bring you five of the biggest stories making waves in Australian sport this morning. We've been up bright and early, scouring the papers and finding out what's happening in the world of sport. But you don't want to just hear from me. You want to hear from some of Australia's top sports journalists and media commentators. And I'm really fortunate today to be able to welcome to the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff for the very first time Benny Jones, AFL Nation commentator and radio producer for Croc Media down in Victoria. How are you, Benny?
I'm well, Pete. It's great to be on board with you, and thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it. I guess like the rest of Melbourne, just wading our way through these lockdown times at the moment, hoping for some positive updates from our man Dan on Sunday. But look, the great thing is, unlike lockdown one, the sport's still rolling on, which is good, and we're entering a very exciting phase of this crazy AFL season. So can't wait for the finals to get underway next Thursday.
That's it. It's a crazy phase, and for a Collingwood supporter such as yourself, you're still in it. But for a Melbourne supporter like me, it's time to look to the draft and the trade, or as these supporters generally call it, our finals period. And there's plenty of stories making waves from a draft and trade perspective, and that's where we're going to kick things off today. And we're going to look at a story from Sam McClure in The Age. He's one of many covering the fact that the Kangaroos, North Melbourne, have told key forward Ben Brown yesterday that it's time for him to look for a new home. Brown, of course, not a free agent, but he is out of contract. He's had a really challenging year under first-year coach Reece Shaw. Only kicked, I think, 7 goals in 9 games or something around that mark this year. But that comes on the back of 3 years in a row from 2017 through 19, where he kicked over 60 goals in each of those seasons and was really close to the Coleman medal on each of those occasions. North Melbourne, super disappointing season for them. They've already made some aggressive delistings, including leadership group members Jamie McMillan and Jasper Pittard. We know Jared Polec, who has 3 years left on his deal, remains or is being put up available for trade as well. Benny, Reece Shaw's trying to build his own team. I get that. He wants to build a team capable of playing to his game plan. But has he actually gone a little bit too far and been a little bit too brutal in his list overhaul plans? I mean, putting Ben Brown up for trade, it's a massive call.
Undoubtedly, and I know working closely with Sam, he bounced into the studio last night. This story has obviously been brewing for a week or two since really North Melbourne's season came to an end, and look, their season, their finals aspirations were well shot. Not long into the season, they started brightly enough, and things looked pretty positive at 2-0 after the restart, but it all fell away pretty quickly. Reece Shaw on his side of things, he's trying to obviously stamp his print on the club, and he's obviously had that first season, full season. That's generally thought of as a bit of a honeymoon period for new coaches. You give them their graces and give them an opportunity to find their feet, but he's had that now, and it was such a disappointing season. I mean, they other than Adelaide, and at least Adelaide finished on a positive note, they didn't really have much to go into the off season to give their fans a great deal of optimism. So 11 is a huge cull, it must be said. A lot of conjecture as to list sizes, what they're going to look like from 2021 and beyond. We imagine they will shrink, but 11, that's a quarter of your playing group. And then to put up the likes of Ben, who we'll speak about more specifically, but also even Sean Higgins, talk about whether he'll see out his final year of his contract. He hasn't been overly persuasive in convincing a lot of people that he's keen to stay. And you mentioned Jared Polec, who's on a huge deal, big money, hasn't really fit in seemingly with the culture, was dropped a few times through the season and has already been at 3 clubs. So is the issue the player? Is it the club? You'd have to think if you've been let go from 2 other clubs without too much of a fight, perhaps the issue's there with the player. But Ben Brown, yeah, it's a fascinating one. So can't wait to see how this unfolds. There's going to be clubs that will be interested. He's clearly a talented player.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that because I want to know where you think he might be a good fit. I mean, the thing that stands out for mine is that this is a player at the start of the season who was offered a 3-year deal on $750K. So it's quite a shift to now not being willing to offer him a deal whatsoever. Of course, Brown and his management turned that down and were hoping to get a longer, slightly higher deal. But it is a massive shift from the football club to go from one extreme to the other. I know they've got Nick Larkey, they've got Cameron Zurhaar, but the other thing is you look at their list and they've got, a few guys there who are contracted, the likes of a Dom Tyson, who have barely played a role for that football club as well, and they're still contracted for next year, so they can't be delisted and are unlikely to have trade value as well. With Ben Brown, where do you think he'd be a good fit, and where might he end up?
Well, Ben Brown at his absolute best, I imagine there's 4 or 5 clubs that would line up and be interested. But the question mark is, does he get back to his best? The knock on him is that he can be probably a touch one-dimensional. He's the old school lead-up full forward. Once the ball hits the deck, he's pretty much out of play. But you only have to look at his record prior to 2020 to know that he's capable, having regularly close to 100 shots on goal each season for the last 3. That deal you spoke of, you talk about sliding doors moments. He was offered the 3 years on good money. He and his management wanted the 4th year. They balked at that, the club. And then, of course, COVID arrived and just threw everything out the window. So maybe they'd love their time again, Ben Brown and management in that front. But, I mean, I look at possibly an Essendon, because if Danaher goes and seemingly Brisbane seem to be a keen party there, they're going to need a key forward. They've got some young kids coming through, but they would need an established key forward. Beyond that, I was looking at other options. The Gold Coast Suns, they've got sort of Ben King. They want to stunt his development, his growth, even though they are looking for established players. But there aren't a lot of others that jump off the paper, and that's going to be the issue for Brown, who's going to command, you'd imagine, a reasonable length contract, but also want a reasonable amount of coin too. So the Bombers are the only obvious ones for me at the moment. But look, it all depends what North are asking for in return.
The interesting thing there as well will be what satisfies a trade from North's perspective. Once they've played their hand and said that you're not part of our plans, it makes it difficult for them to have a lot of leverage at the trade table. Our second story today, and we'll touch on this one just briefly, but one that really caught our eye this morning in the Herald Sun. It's a column from Essendon Supercoach Kevin Sheedy, or Kevin from marketing as he is these days, and he's come up with the idea that the AFL should create a medal to honour the competition's best defender each season. He references the fact that the Brownlow medal, the AFL Player Association MVP, they almost never go to a defender. Obviously, there's the Coleman medal, which goes to the forward who kicks the most goals. But as Sheedy says here, and I'll read one short paragraph, it's time to strike a medal in honour of backmen who help win flags as much as anyone else, and yet who are constantly overshadowed by an obsession with midfielders and a blinding fascination with forwards. In my view, it's time for the Gavin Wanganeen medal. That would be a fitting name, but I'm open to suggestions. Benny, is Kevin Sheedy right here? Do we need a medal to acknowledge the best defender in the game every season? And if so, who would you name it after, and who would be in contention to win it this year?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love Sheeds, and he's always one with some amazing ideas. Some of the greatest facets of our game that we see on an annual basis are from the brains of Kevin Sheedy. So I'd never disagree with Sheeds, and I love medals. I never got many as a kid. I was no good at sport, or I was very, very mediocre. So I think the more we can hand out, the better. He's right. I mean, and we've known this for a long time. Awards, particularly the Brownlow, but the MVPs and the like, tend to go to midfielders. In fact, invariably always go to midfielders. The MVP one might be interesting this year, because I know, speaking to Matty Lloyd on a show that I produce, he had Tom Hawkins as his most valuable player of the year, which would be a rarity to see a key forward get it, but he's had that good a year. Clearly, the defenders need some love. I don't mind Gavin Wanganeen if his medal, if his name was attached to the medal. And obviously, Kevin's got a bit of bias there, having coached him to a premiership and a Brownlow medal, probably one of the last defenders to win one. And I notice through the notes provided that, obviously one name sticks out recently, and that would be Danny Frawley. We know, obviously, sadly, no longer with us, but he championed the defenders on the bounce on Fox Footy with the Golden Fist. And I think it would be appropriate in that sense to maybe get Spud's name involved. As for contenders this year, well, Luke Ryan from Fremantle, I think he'll be a walk-up start for the All-Australian. Having to take on some big jobs with Fremantle down some key defenders, I think he's been absolutely superb. And then you look at the others that are often in the conversation. Harris Andrews, hopefully back for the finals from that hamstring, but he's been, again, brilliant for Brisbane. Some of the sort of more mobile defenders like your Jacob Wiedering, or maybe even a Darcy Moore at Collingwood, who've all done good jobs and had good seasons. So absolutely, all for a Defenders Award. How it gets voted on and who consists of that panel to vote on it, we'll leave that with Sheeds.
Yeah, another ripping idea from Kevin from marketing there. Our third story today, we're going to turn to cricket now. And it's crazy to think that we're that close to the summer of cricket kicking off. Article from Peter Lawler in The Australian, who covers the game so wonderfully. He's looking at the Indian Premier League, which has kicked off in recent days. and talk through, firstly, how pleasing it was to see Steve Smith return and bat really, really well for the Rajasthan Royals after his concussion scare that ruled him out of the ODI series in England. But he looks more broadly at the IPL and its place in the sporting world. Here's a couple of stats for you. BCCI Secretary Jay Shah announced yesterday that 200 million Indians watched the first match. And other metrics saw a 30% jump in ratings from years gone by, despite, of course, it being played in the UAE with no fans this year. Broadcasters were expecting big numbers, but this is the highest ever opening day viewership of any sporting league in any country. Lawler goes on to say that the Super Bowl attracts about half that number. There's another point he makes here, if I can quickly scroll through the notes, where I think he says something like 1 in every $3 made in cricket globally can be directly attributed to the Indian Premier League. So it's massive business. Just how important, with an Aussie lens on things for a minute, Benny, how important is the IPL in terms of keeping Aussie cricketers' earning capacity as high as possible? And also, by allowing their cricketers to take part, how important is it that Cricket Australia keeps sweet with the BCCI from that perspective?
Oh, clearly hugely important. And having a look through Pete's article this morning and some of the numbers you're reeling off there, Pete, I mean, I'll be the first to admit I haven't been an avid follower of the IPL, a curiosity every now and then, particularly around auction time, to see what players go for what amounts of money. But it is just, I mean, I don't know what is bigger than a juggernaut, but that's clearly what the IPL is. It is just stunning, those numbers you refer to, and the passion that clearly those on the subcontinent have for it, and around the globe for that matter. It's big wherever you go. Hugely important because, as we know, there's still a lot of uncertainty with Australian cricket. We've had recent pay disputes, clashes with the board and the Players Association, which I'm sure has made a few players nervous and has probably put a few offside. So I think for these guys to go over there and to earn huge dollars, well played to them. What I'd like to see naturally, and of course we know the BCCI pretty much run the game as much as the ICC would like to say otherwise. I'd love to see some more of their talent come out our way for the fledgling Big Bash, which I think is at a real crossroads, particularly coming into this summer where we know we're not going to have the access to foreign players due to COVID, and there's a lot of issues about the length of the Big Bash campaign as well. So I'd love to see more Indians be given the opportunity to come out here, but as far as keeping the BCCI on side, absolutely, I think that's in Cricket Australia's best interests, and keeping their players and their talent happy when we call upon them for home summers.
Yeah, really, really good point. And I think that the IPL kind of shows the way to the rest of the world in terms of how a T20 competition should be run. And to your point about not being an avid watcher, I'd put myself in the same boat. But I think the beauty of it is the form of entertainment that the IPL is. You can switch on a game at any point, any time, halfway through the game. You don't need to know who's where in the competition standings. You're instantly going to recognise some of the biggest names. You're going to be entertained. There's great commentators. The coverage of it's quite remarkable. And one further point from that article before we move to another story is that Star India, the broadcaster in India, is broadcasting the IPL on 20 channels this year in 7 different languages, and their coverage of that is unprecedented. So for a nation that's having a tough time with COVID, it's a welcome distraction, and certainly those numbers showcase just how important the IPL is in India. You spoke about a fledgling competition with the Big Bash League. Well, from one fledgling competition to another, let's have a look at the A-League, and a story from Marco Monteverde in the News Corp Australia Newswire this morning, where he reveals that A-League clubs have started contract negotiations with their own players in the belief that a collective bargaining agreement does not need to be in place for the 2020 and 21 season to proceed. While Professional Footballers Australia officials are pleased that clubs have started pay talks with players, they are, of course, continuing to push for a CBA to be in place. Perth Glory CEO Tony Pignata said that contract talks were based on a reduced salary cap of $2.1 million. Pignata says we're renegotiating everyone's contracts at the moment. The cap's come down, the TV broadcast money's come down. Players understand this, and we need to work out some new figures from a 10-month period from September to June 30 next year. What Pignata doesn't mention there, of course, is that the Glory have currently stood down all of their players, so they're not getting paid at the moment. It's clearly a really messy situation, and we've seen, really the majority of foreign imports and even some of the top Australian players opting to leave that competition and look for opportunities overseas. How concerned, and you cover the game very closely, how concerned should A-League fans be about the state of flux in player contracting at present, and how do you see the quality of the competition being impacted next season?
Yeah, it's a massive concern, Pete. And look, there's no hiding from it, and no sport has been immune to obviously the impacts of what COVID has done, both here and overseas. The A-League, because it was already, I guess, pretty fragile prior to the virus arriving, that it was always going to be one of the most vulnerable, and thus it has proven. They did a great job to get the season completed the way that they did through the hubs, but it was always going to be a huge question mark coming into a new season. Reduced salary cap, which is already pretty small anyway. When we talk about the global powers of football, some that are right in our backyard through Asia, I mean, you just cannot compete. A $2.1 million salary cap. Some of these Chinese and Japanese clubs are paying players that on an almost weekly basis. So huge issues for owners who have poured money into these clubs. We've got MacArthur coming in next season. Western United have been involved for a season, so they are expanding, but it feels like at this point in time, we almost need to be constricting what we're doing to try and, formulate plans and streamline moving forward. It's going to be so hard. So club owners are scratching their heads. Players are, you're right, foreign players in particular, heading home for family reasons, but unlikely to come back because the money's just not going to be there. So standard-wise is going to be a significant drop. And then the moving forward, and the big question is, and this is for James Johnson and the FFA, and they've got a lot to work through, is there's now this push for clearly the championship or second division, if you will. Promotion, relegation is always a conversation in the background with Australian football, seemingly treading water on that front. So there's going to be some big decisions to be made. The A-League, do they just blow it up completely and start from scratch? Because at the moment, it's hard to see how it's going to be feasible to expect this to be a success moving forward without guarantees of fans allowed in stadiums as well. And the TV dollars, I mean, I hate to use the cliche, but the $64 million question is, how do they get a TV broadcaster on side, particularly free to air, and get some of that money filtered back into clubs so we can get the A-League back to the glory days of 2011, 2012, when the Del Pieros and Heskies and Onos of this world were coming out and putting on a show on a weekly basis.
Yeah, well said. It is massively concerning, though. I do want to note a story in a different newspaper from Dominic Bossy in the Sydney Morning Herald, where he says that the Newcastle Jets are hoping to come to terms with a new owner after an agreement in principle to sell the club to a Chinese-owned investment firm based in Australia. So that would be good news for the Jets. Our final story this morning, we're going to turn to rugby league, and a story in the Sydney Morning Herald from Adrian Prashenko and also from friend of the show, Adam Pengilly. And it's looking at the Canberra Raiders and the Melbourne Storm, both deciding to rest a huge amount of players for the final round of the NRL regular season this week ahead of the final series kicking off next week. The Raiders have rested 9 regular players, estimated to be on a combined salary of 4.5 million. The Storm resting 12 players for their clash against St George Illawarra. The Dragons went into that when the odds first went up. They were $9 outsiders, and they're now $1.75 favourites to beat the Storm. We saw the Raiders do this last year as well, and they went down to the Warriors in the final round of the season and went on to qualify for the grand final anyway. That's their argument, that this is an important way of managing our players. We haven't had buys this season. There's no pre-finals buy like in the AFL, and we've got an obligation to look after our players, from a well-being perspective. They also argue here, Raiders Chief Executive David Furner also mentions, and I don't know about if I can quite buy this, the only way to develop NRL players is playing them in the NRL. Your under-20s have a whole year of misdevelopment this year, and we have a duty to these players as well as guys who are out of contract, and we need to be, we need to see if they're up to it and see if they can be rewarded for all they've done this year. I think that's a little convenient because you could probably drip feed some of those players through over a few weeks. Final thing before I turn to you here, for the Raiders, if they finish 5th on the ladder, if they lose this match and finish 5th, it means they don't have the challenge of going to play top of the table Penrith in week 1 of the finals. I ask you, Benny, is the integrity of the competition a little bit compromised in this instance? And does the NRL need to look at whether it's introducing a pre-finals bye or perhaps an FA Cup style policy like we see over in the UK, where teams are penalised if they don't play their strongest teams?
Well, Pete, the short answer is yes, the integrity of the competition is brought into question when these sorts of things happen. We saw it happen in the AFL a few years ago. Ross Lyon, famously at Fremantle at the time, rested I think it might have been 9 to 10 players in round 23 in a game that really had no bearing on the fortunes of Fremantle, who were preparing for a final series. The AFL said, we can't be having that. It's not a good look for the game. I think Gil McLachlan introduced the pre-finals bye, which is a 50-50 as to whether the fans like it. It depends where your club's at. We saw what it did to the Dogs in 2016, and it may help some clubs this year as well, albeit under slightly different circumstances. From the NRL point of view, the Raiders and the Storm, I mean, let's be brutally honest. They're in the business of winning premierships. They don't give a stuff what the NRL think. Look, they care what the broadcasters think because the broadcasters filter in good money to them, but they want to position themselves to win a premiership. The Storm can't drop out of the top two. As you said, I think the Raiders just trying to position themselves nicely. Good luck to them. If the NRL want to come in over the top and put in rules and regulations, well, that's okay. Everyone will know heading into a season, but these new knee-jerk reactions that we have when they're occurring, I mean, really fans of both the Raiders and Storm won't care less. They just want their best players playing in the finals. And as far as the development angle, well, yeah, okay, it's a good opportunity for youngsters to get a taste of it. But that said, it has been a unique season in that there haven't been those origin buys throughout the season as well. So I'm fine with it, but I understand integrity comes into it, betting, all of that sort of stuff. And the broadcasters want bang for their buck. So I can see both sides of the argument. But in the NRL, it's up to them. If they want to bring in something like the AFL, then that's their prerogative. Yeah,
I think I couldn't agree more. The clubs have done nothing wrong. They're just playing by the rules that have been set. But I think the NRL needs to put a rule in place. Maybe it's around, if it's not a pre-finals bye, a maximum number of changes without closer inspection as to why those players have been, taken out for a week or that sort of thing. Might be something that might work in the future. Benny, we have gone slightly over time, but I tell you what, I don't mind at all because it's great to chat sport with you, and it's been probably 10 years since we used to do this back in the day. So, mate, fantastic to have you on the show. Love to have you back on the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff again soon, and sending all the best wishes to you down there in Victoria, mate.
It's been my privilege, mate, to be a part of it. So thank you very much. And it's just nice to speak to someone on the outside world when you're working from home in lockdown Melbourne, just to see a different face. As much as I love my wife, I think she's sick of me as well. So it's been a lot of fun, mate, and I'm happy to jump on anytime you like.
Good on you, Benny. That's Benny Jones from Croc Media. Thanks so much for watching and listening to the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. We'll see you tomorrow with Jimmy Tucker. Cheers.